All right, well, welcome everyone to Multifamily Electrification. Change is coming fast. Before we get started, a huge thanks to our session's top tier sponsor, Mitsubishi Electric. As a leader in advanced multifamily HVAC technologies, Mitsubishi has ductless, ducted mini split, variable refrigerant, otherwise known as VRF heat pump, used for air conditioning and ventilation. Mitsubishi has a solution for all homes and buildings, no matter where they are, whether they're new or existing. They continue to innovate their building HVAC systems, creating efficiency, comfort, and wellness for all spaces by providing industry-leading products, design, technical training. And one thing I really appreciate is just that one-on-one connection you can make with Mitsubishi staff, unlike other HVAC companies. They're right there when you need them and reach out and help solve the problem. One thing they've put together is this Inflation Reduction Act funding opportunity that pairs their indoors and outdoor condensers and gives you a sense of what works and where it works, whether you want to do a cold weather climate heat pump system, for example, in the north, what kind of systems you might want to be using. They've also launched their IntelliHeat system to help the transition to electrification, where people have existing furnaces and you can just pair it with the outdoor heat pump. I mean, why does it even make sense to make an air conditioning system anymore when we can just use a heat pump to do both of it? Mitsubishi also provides their diamond contractors who are trained on ductless systems or ducted systems and have the knowledge to help you out. So you can head over to MitsubishiComfort.com, learn more about their systems, their contractors, and decarbonize your projects. And also thanks to our second tier sponsor, Panasonic, who has ventilation systems all the way from exhaust to supply, all the way up to smart demand controlled systems for your projects. All right, again, welcome everyone to Multifamily Electrification. Change is coming fast. This course is brought to you by the Green Home Institute. The Green Home Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. We are a small but mighty team of 3, and today I will be your moderator. I am the education manager here at the Green Home Institute. As always, this course is approved for multiple continuing education units, including the health and energy pillar in the Certified Green Home Professional designation. AIA Health, Welfare, and Safety may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. So with that, I am super excited to welcome our guests, Kim and Walker, back here for the second time on our show. Always great to have returning guests and to be talking about this very important topic, because it is happening and it's going to happen to everyone. And we need to make sure, electrification is on the top of your mind and you're aware of what to do and be ready for it. So it doesn't take you off guard, whether through regulations or incentives or just understanding the benefits. So Kim, Walker, it's great to have you back. Please take it away.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brett. We're very excited to be here. I will get the slides going here. And go back to the top, put it in presentation mode. Is everyone seeing slides and not mine as a desktop?
Yep.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. As Brett said, this is our second appearance at the Green Home Institute webinars. We were here just about 3 years ago when our book, Blueprint for Greening Affordable Housing, had first come out, just to talk about that topic of how green and affordable housing belong together and go together and work together. So we're very excited to be back. Today, our topics are going to be, what are the policies that are driving this what feels to a lot of people and to me as a very rapid paradigm shift from thinking about energy efficiency and using less energy to thinking about how do we reduce carbon. And so we're going to talk about what are some of the drivers of that. Mitsubishi is an excellent sponsor for today because we're going to talk about the methods that affordable housing developers are using as they begin to electrify. And of course, heat pumps are a big part of that. And then the money is coming, and we want to talk about how that is going to help to make all of this happen. And importantly, we want to make sure that we are centering the conversation in equity to make sure that as we electrify and as we access the new resources that are available, that we make sure it's being done in an equitable way. And today's presentation really builds from an article that Walker and I wrote that Shelterforce published at the beginning of the year. And just getting at this whole question of the changes that developers and owners of affordable housing are having to face and having to implement as they either try to do retrofits to their existing projects or think about decarbonizing their existing portfolio or plan for new projects. And this grows out of a topic in our book. So our book really covers the basics of green affordable housing and how to do it, but we also identified some trends. And maybe Walker, you want to pick it up from here.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kim. And just kind of dove into the content, didn't completely introduce ourselves. So,
That's true. Sorry.
Yeah. Comment, not surprising. Always wanting to get down to work. I'm Walker Wells. I'm a principal with the firm in Los Angeles, California-based urban planning and sustainability consulting firm called Rainey Associates, and have been in this arena of green building and affordable housing and urban sustainability for the last 25 years or so. And it was wonderful to have a chance to put this book together as a co-author with Kim, and we'll talk about these trends in a second, but just let Kim do a little bit of an introduction also.
Yes, thank you, Walker. I'm actually a Grand Rapidian by birth and still have family there, so get back from time to time, but I have lived in Boston for many years, and I'm based here, and I do sustainability, green building, and resilience consulting to owners and developers of affordable housing.
Yeah, and I think this bi-coastal perspective that we're able to bring to things has been valuable in the book and also in today's conversation, because I'll say things like, well, nobody does that here. And Kim will say, well, everybody does that here, or that approach wouldn't work on the East Coast because of the climate, or, various, points of comparison that I think have been quite helpful. So, when we were putting the book together about 3 years ago, we did identify these three trends, and we saw that there was an interest in looking beyond the scale of the building and looking at community scale strategies, sustainable neighborhoods, community solar, sort of broader impact, continuous, increase in information about health. Some of that will come up today about health issues related to combustion-based appliances and leakage of methane into living spaces, and trying to stop that, get rid of that, come up with alternatives. Social equity, and thinking really about how technological innovations can benefit or burden different populations. And then finally, this move towards climate. So when I first got involved with green building 25 years or so ago, it felt like an outgrowth of a long-term interest in sort of energy conservation, energy efficiency, and then we brought in water and health and location and sort of around these comprehensive green building rating systems. And then even more recently, the conversation was about energy efficiency, reducing energy use intensity, whether it was electricity or gas. And then fairly quickly, almost felt like all of a sudden, it shifted to be about decarbonization and climate, largely because in some parts of the country, the grid has become significantly cleaner or more based on renewables, or at least carbon-free sources than it had been in the past. And so that shifted things from just thinking about building energy efficiency or even net zero design at the building basis, but recognizing, the grid that the building is plugging into. And if the grid is getting clean, then you want to have end use systems and appliances that can take that clean electricity. And then, as Kim mentioned, this article that we wrote for Shelterforce basically said, hey, this is going on. Affordable housing developers, should be aware of it and start preparing for changes in system design, changes in utility rates, and preparing also for what Kim said, the new sources of funding to help support this shift and really acceleration towards decarbonization of the building stock. we go to the next slide, all of this just reinforces what we have talked about for quite a while about how bringing green building and affordable housing together is one way to demonstrate sustainability in a very sort of tangible way and demonstrate urban sustainability. So when people say, what does that really look like, Walker? Sustainable urbanism could say, well, green affordable housing is one good example because it does touch on equity, economy, and environment, the three sort of pillars or elements of sustainability. This diagram just shows how affordable housing does that already. But if you bring in a green approach, you can augment equity, augment economy, and the environmental benefits. And then this decarbonization move is very much consistent with that theme that we're providing even greater health benefits by decreasing or eliminating sources of combustion. The electrical equipment is nearly always more efficient than the combustion-based equipment. And in many places, but not everywhere, that results in utility cost savings. So there's an economic benefit to the environment, to the tenants. And then on the environment front, we're not just looking at saving energy, but we're really looking at supporting this transition to a clean energy economy or a carbon-free economy. And then on our agenda, Kim touched on it, but we just want to touch on these four things. What are the new requirements and policies that are driving this? Some of it is technological innovation. We have electric-based equipment that works and is tested, but at least in the state that I'm located in California, there's very much of a regulatory push towards decarbonization. How affordable housing owners and developers are sort of shifting to all electric design. Where's the money at now, and where is it likely to be coming from? And then how to integrate equity as sort of a mindset and a lens, but in sort of practical and intangible ways, and how projects are designed or how utility costs are shared between the owners and the tenants. And on this next slide, we should have information about a poll. So we just wanted to get sort of a benchmark about the level of experience of the people who are participating today. So this question is, what is your experience with, energy and carbon emission mandates? And Brett, we may need some help to have.
I apologize. I didn't think the polls were coming till later. I'm building them now, so maybe we can just ask this one and we'll have the other ones ready in a second. So my mistake.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, should people just put responses in the chat, Brett? Is that the best?
That's perfect. Yeah, just go ahead and ask it.
Okay. So our poll questions for this, the first is, are you living someplace where there are already energy and carbon emission reporting requirements? So you don't necessarily have to take action, but you have to report into your city how much energy your building is using. So that's one. Do you have those kind of things going on where you live and work? Do you have, has this code shift happened that the building code is now requiring all electric or electric preferred buildings? Or a parallel to that or a companion to that is that there are natural gas hookup moratoriums going in place. Another one is, has your state or your municipality set carbon reduction targets, like in Boston or Massachusetts, 50% reduction by 2030? Have you got that kind of thing starting to influence policy? If they haven't been set in stone through laws and regulations, are they targets and goals that have been set that that people are working toward, but they haven't translated into laws? Or are you in a place where none of this is really happening yet, or that you're not aware of what's been happening? So those were our options for the poll. Walker, what do we see in the chat?
Oh, well, we see a lot of great variety of things from a number of people having zero experience, no experience with any of these things. Two some people saying that they're in communities that have a building energy benchmarking program that requires the annual reporting of their energy use. I don't know if it's in carbon, kilograms of carbon or tons of carbon per square foot, or if it's energy use intensity. And then a few people have noted that there's maybe not mandates, but targets that have been set in the future for reducing greenhouse gas emissions in their community. Common things would be a 40% reduction by 2030, or a 90 or 100% reduction by 2045 or 2050. And these sort of electrification ordinances, are ways that those big picture policy goals are getting implemented. Okay, should we?
Yeah, so that sounds like folks are all kind of all over the map, and so that's great. Let's see if I can get the next slide to show up. So Walker and I thought we'd just bring you up to date with what's happening in Massachusetts and in California. Now, this is good news, bad news for us in that California is ACEE's #1 state for action around energy and carbon reduction, and Massachusetts is #2. So we understand that we are in leader states around this, which is good and bad as far as when you have to implement all this stuff. Right? But in Massachusetts, what's really driving our state level policy, and that's now coming into local policies, was the act in 2021, creating a next generation roadmap for Massachusetts climate policy. And that's where we've got these targets mandated in law now, and starting to, I'm sure those of you who follow public policy know that change is not immediate, right? But we are now starting to see these baselines flow through to state agencies and their policies and programs and grants and services. So it's 50% below a baseline of 1990 by 2030, and to be net zero by 2050. Also, Massachusetts is what's called the home rule state, which really means you can't rule your own home unless the state gives you permission to do so. So this law allows localities to have a stricter energy code than the state code. They're allowed to leapfrog by one code cycle and implement that locally. And then in Boston, in affordable housing, a couple of years ago, the policies changed, and you can no longer get money to build your affordable housing development using city money unless you are building to a net zero emissions standard. And then for all buildings, the city has implemented disclosure and reporting ordinance. And so everyone has to share their portfolio manager accounts with the city and report on their energy use and their carbon emission intensities. And that is with a goal of getting the carbon emission intensity to zero by 2045. And for the first few years, similar to those of you who are familiar with New York, for the first few years, it's a reporting requirement, but then it is going to transition to requiring energy and performance audits and making changes to show that you are actively working to bring your building to that net zero by 2045. So this is really creating a lot of, let's call it excitement from building owners of all sizes and all types as they try to understand what this means for them and what they're going to have to be doing. Walker, what's happening in California?
Well, some related things. So, the state has set some greenhouse gas emissions reduction targets statewide. So it is 40% reduction by 2030 and 80% reduction by 2050. And then concurrent, there's a requirement that the electrical grid is 100% carbon free. So it doesn't say renewable, it says carbon free by 2045. And so those things together are then being reflected in the state building code. And so you can see on the slides that our 2022 code has started to have these sort of strong encouragements for all electric design. So you're not precluded from doing mixed fuel building. But if you do, you still have to put in the wiring and have the electrical capacity and the panel sizing that could support the future electric appliances. And then at the local level in the city of Los Angeles, there is a benchmarking requirement. So buildings over 25,000 square feet in Los Angeles need to report annual energy use. And if you don't achieve savings over a 5-year period, you're required to do an audit and retro commissioning. And then the city has started the conversation about sort of emulating what's happened in New York City with local law 97, about having an emissions thresholds that would step down over time, also getting to net zero, which is when we move either to an EY standard or a greenhouse gas emissions per square foot standard. And the city of Los Angeles has been looking at that for a while. We've had some legal challenges to the ability to completely restrict the use of gas. It can be perceived as local agencies effectively setting appliance efficiency standards, which they don't have the authority to do. But local agencies, similar to Boston, can adopt a performance standard that is more rigorous than the state requirements. And so again, an emissions per square foot would be a performance standard, multiple pathways to get there. And that's what's currently in discussion. Continued focus on electrification being reflected in what we're seeing in the drafts of what will be the 2025 building code.
I wanted to chime in too, because for those who are watching this recording, and I assume who are watching it for the life of this recording, by 2029, your state can get paid by the federal government to bolster their code and go beyond the code to some electrification opportunities. So if you check out the DOE website and you go and you look, and I shared a link in the chat for all of you who are here live today, but I can also share it later on. Go to your state and tell them, hey, we want you to adopt the latest code and make strong standards. And by the way, you can get paid to do it. So just wanted to put that one out there. That kind of is hot off the press within the last couple of weeks. It's out there and it's through 2029. So anyone watching this, you can still go and do it. So okay.
Yeah, I just say on new construction, it just seems prudent to plan for the, electrification of the building. So, it's a real missed opportunity to build a new home that doesn't have, the electric panel capacity, electric service capacity, and the outlets in the right places to take the future electric appliances, even if people are, not interested in doing that or unwilling to do that. But just to sort of future-proof the projects for this sort of a eventual electrification.
Okay, so we're ready to move on to our second topic. If there are other code questions, maybe we'll hold them for the end. Brett, do you have the poll ready?
There it is.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right.
So could you maybe briefly read? Yeah.
Sure. So this is just to get a sense of what those of you with us today are doing so far, or whether you haven't done it. And, are you doing this building by building? Are you just considering it? Is it starting to be part of the conversation? Have you gone all in? Are you developing a portfolio level strategy and roadmap for decarbonization as the Better Climate Challenge is having larger portfolio owners of property doing? Just where are you at in starting to take action here?
And I would encourage anyone who either can't see the poll or has another idea or is watching this on demand in the future, put it into the comments box. What are you doing? Share it with us. We'd love to hear about it, no matter what you're doing. It looks like right now we're at about 55%. So why don't we go ahead and close the poll down here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we should be able to see those results.
All right. We got a lot of what do they say? Electrification curious. Good for you. But there's a lot of people who have started building all electric and who have started doing upgrades to their systems with existing buildings. And even some people starting to think at a portfolio level. So that is great to see.
Yeah, that's fantastic to see.
Folks are this far along in what can be a very anxiety producing transition that we're going through. So thank you, Brett. So electrification, you know, there's some pros and cons to it. Of course, we're all having to do it, right? So it's not like the cons are going to get us to a point where we say, so we're not going to do it. But we have to recognize that it's not just a piece of cake to do this, right? So it is a good thing in that if your building is all electric, the cleaner the grid gets, the cleaner your building gets in terms of carbon emissions. So so it's a bit of a working together thing of using your building, building your building, seeing what kind of electricity comes from the grid, and getting to a point where you can be carbon neutral. And a lot of the basics of electrification are already well established out there in practice and therefore not difficult to adopt. And as someone who cares a lot about healthy housing, getting combustion appliances out of homes and getting families away from atmospheric furnaces and gas ranges that don't really ventilate well, or families, of course, never turn on the fans, this can only be good, right? And then, of course, there's a lot of money coming to help us all with these conversions in existing housing, especially, but also to make it standard practice in new construction. So the cons are that suddenly a whole bunch of stuff that used to be on gas is now on electricity, and older buildings and older homes often don't have the level of service that the building needs. And sometimes it's a matter of changing out the panel inside the unit or inside the electric room in a larger building. But in larger buildings, and when we start to do this at a community scale, the transformer that's stepping down the power from the grid into the neighborhood or into the building has to be upgraded. And that can be a really expensive and time-consuming thing, depending on how your local utility handles responsibility for that. Then if you're trying to provide on-site electricity, then you're going to need more photovoltaic panels on your building in order to meet more of that increased electric use. And then, of course, there's more coordination with utilities around the interconnection agreements and the other ways that a system that you build on your house or upgrades that you make interact with your local utility. But people are moving ahead, and of course, very common, as that Mitsubishi slide at the beginning showed us, mini splits. People are doing those both in new construction and in existing housing. They can be particularly good for existing housing because they need limited messing around with ductwork and connections and going through walls of buildings. They take a lot of space. This is for a new 60 unit building. And so the roof is covered with these heat pumps because with the mini splits as the strategy, they can take 2 or 3 heat pump units for the larger apartments to be able to provide the heating and cooling that's needed, especially heating in the Boston area. But they're very common and people are familiar with them. And of course, other forms of heat pumps, as Brett indicated, the variable refrigerant flow models, the VRF types, are often used in mixed use or in the community parts of a building. Can also be used for apartments, though that can be complicated with who's paying for the heat and the cooling. And of course, water source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps, all of those things are there. And the appliances are coming along and that's all going. But Walker and I have spent a lot of time on water heating because it has many more challenges, especially for multifamily housing. And the first is this decision about central hot water, which is very common in Boston and quite common in certain markets in California, versus individual systems within individual units. In California, it's been very common to have gas boilers with solar preheat as a way of reducing the gas, and hot water, heat pump hot water does not play well with solar preheating systems. Heat pumps heating water want cold water coming into them, not hot water coming into them. And so it's not easy to change out a central gas boiler with the heat pump gas boiler if you already have a solar preheat system on your building, a solar thermal system. And you have to be really careful about the design in these central systems about how the circulating water comes back to the system. Because the heat pumps want cold water. So you need to have buffer tanks and other places that otherwise the performance levels of the heat pumps drop dramatically. And so those are all central system issues. And then if it's individual systems, especially in retrofit situations, but also true in new construction, the heat pumps are bigger just in physical size than the typical electric or gas water heaters that have been in the tiny little closet. And so they're not fitting in that closet just as a physical consideration. And then the reality of heat pumps is that they need anywhere from 700 to 1,000 cubic feet of free air to function properly. Well, that's equivalent to a 10 by 10 by 10 room. And so who in affordable housing has the space or the budget to build rooms for the water heaters? So no one, of course. And so now they're requiring ducting the intake air into the unit and ducting the exhaust air, because the exhaust air cools down the existing space. And without that, you're paying to heat and cool the air, and instead it's going into the heat pump. So you have that ghosting of the power load to heat the hot water. And in cold climates, we worry about where the heat pump is located and whether it's going to be okay in those few days where we get -6 degrees. And so there's those kind of concerns that have to be addressed. And then some of what we've already talked about highlights some of the issues with new construction versus retrofitting existing properties. But we have to do it. People are starting to do it. So I'm going to pass it over to Walker, and he's going to walk us through 4 examples of how people are doing this.
Kim, I wanted to, before we pass it on real quick, kind of go back to that first issue you outlined, because we've seen it in like older neighborhoods where there is a transformer, and if somebody wants to upgrade to all electric, they really can't. And it's like, who's paying for this? Oh, I've heard it's this is 4 or 5 years before we upgrade this transformer. We're going to wait till the transformer explodes, right? I mean, so what are you hearing with that? And have you heard if microgrids are a solution to get people by in the interim? Have you seen anything like that? And if that's part of your talk coming up, feel free to say, hey, we're getting to that one. So,
so the short answer to that question is no. Don't have any great ideas for how to solve that problem. There are some technologies that people are starting to use at the individual unit level that is saying, well, if we only have this much capacity in the panel and we can't upgrade that, how can we shift the load or stop the load so that whatever needs the power gets it and other things don't until another time. So for example, it would just shut down the dishwasher if there's a demand for heating and cooling, right? And so that you can handle at the individual house level. But if you scale that up to a local grid, it's much more complicated. Then you have to be giving the utility permission to shut your building down or scale your power use down. And that's, very, very challenging. So, and then microgrids are really hard to implement, and especially if you've got a lot of small properties with individual owners. In Massachusetts, the monopolies that are given to the utilities won't allow you to transfer power between those homes. So the legal and implementation baggage for trying to do microgrids is just too complicated for most people to take seriously.
Thank you.
And I could just add or share that this sort of issue with the utility coordination shows up all the time. So we may at this point say we have viable technologies. We're getting to a place where there are installers and contractors who are familiar with the heat pump systems, understanding the different implications, the design implications. But there is that upstream issue of ensuring that the utility grid can provide the power. And then if you have solar, that it can receive the power. And we're certainly hearing on the, California utilities of everything's ready to go, but it takes 6 or 9 months to get the permanent power turned on, or debates about who's supposed to pay for the transformer. And maybe a topic for another session. But the other thing that has emerged onto the scene, maybe even a little bit after all of this electrification, is battery storage. And that's a requirement in the 2022 energy code in California. And there is a little bit of a question of what the batteries are supposed to be used for. Buildings are often not designed to be islandable unless there's a real strong intention about providing some type of resilience component, resilience hub, where the community room could operate for a certain period of time. But it's often discussed, but it's not often implemented. So there are batteries out there that could probably be used to support the building if the grid is down, or probably hypothetically, but sometimes in practice, if the expertise is there, used to modulate energy costs depending on when the peak demand is, or avoid time of use charges. But this is kind of a combination of the advent of new technologies showing up in the buildings, and then maybe not having all of the sort of technology, software, firmware systems in place to make great use out of that technology on the battery storage front. Likely a way that all these things can work together, but that still feels a bit of a sort of an emerging area of practice, I would say. Okay, well, on to these examples. Oh, go ahead, bro.
Oh, yeah, saying thank you.
All right. So onto these examples. We just wanted to show you all, some examples of what this looks like, because we're talking about all this terminology. So we have a few examples here that Kim and I have been involved in. So this is a project in Mar Vista, which is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. It's a 50-unit building, urban infill, existing neighborhood, multi-story. The developers, the Community Corporation of Santa Monica. And the choice here was to use a central system, and basically to sort of evolve from a gas central system to an electric central system. And I think this was partly based on the fact that, for the past 10 years, we'd sort of moved towards what felt like a very elegant approach, which was, a 90-something% efficient boiler coupled with solar thermal preheat that could offset 60-70% of the hot water needs of the building, or energy needed to make hot water for the building. And so, that system was done over and over and over again, at least in California. So once there was this desire really on the part of the developer, who's been sort of a leader in sustainability for years, I think the obvious thing was like, well, let's take out the boiler and just put in an electric thing. And that led us to this Colmac central system. And so what you're seeing here is the Colmac heat pump unit, and then adjacent to it are a number of tanks, both to the left and then sort of to the right and behind. And those are also, those tanks are the image that's, part of the announcement of this, this session. So I think there's 4 or 5 of them. So it's making quite a bit of hot water, storing it in effectively a thermal battery, because the heat pump water heaters can't make hot water as fast as a gas boiler. So you have a reserve of hot water, and then that's serving the whole building. And figuring this out has been complicated because it was unfamiliar even to our leading edge mechanical engineer. And then, having people understand how it operates and needs to be maintained has had some initial challenges, most of which has been ironed out. But this was again, a progressive developer in terms of sustainability, sort of taking a step towards electrification. So there's one setup, central boiler. And then we have another setup, also Santa Monica project, also Community Corp. It's a centralized system, but it's built out of multiple individual heat pumps and condensing units. And this is the Sandon Sanco. The CO is, I believe it's carbon dioxide. I'm not sure why there isn't a 2 on there, but they are using CO2 as their refrigerant in these Sandon units. So basically they put 4 of them in series, also in a centralized system. You see the tanks in the back there, also located on the roof. This setup, gives you redundancy. So if, one machine breaks, there's still 3 more that are operating. In the next slide. So the project that Kim worked on.
Yeah, so this is a project in design. And again, this is one of my clients who had, over the series of several projects, figured out how to do the solar hot water with the very efficient boiler, and is now having to transition. And this is for a 44-unit building about to go into construction. And you can see all the little heat pumps for the units in the diagonal sport area. But, oh, sorry. I was trying to use my mouse as a pointer and that didn't work. You can see there's a little penthouse that has 10 storage tanks, and then there are 10 heat pumps up at the top on the outside. So the heat pumps are outside, and they'll be transferring water into those storage tanks. And one of those is that buffer tank to avoid that bringing warm water into the heat pumps problem that I talked about a little bit earlier. But as Walker said, this is very new technology, especially on the East Coast. And so just taking a lot of brain damage on the part of the design team to figure out what equipment to specify, how many storage tanks are needed to meet the loads, assuming you've got, most of the people in the building wanting to shower somewhere between 6 and 10 in the morning, and all those kind of things. So we are going to try this and hope it works.
Then I can say, out here, some of the discussion has been, well, what about everybody who wants to use hot water, I don't know, from 6 at 10 in the evening? And, wouldn't that mean that you'd be turning on your electric, water heating appliances right during peak demand period and the highest cost of electricity? And then I've since learned, well, you avoid that by having the thermal storage and you have the tanks. So you're using electricity to heat the water and store it in the middle of the day when either your building has excess solar or the grid has excess solar and it's cheap and it's plentiful. Then you don't need to be using that when electricity is expensive. So a couple more examples. This project Las Flores, same developer, also in Santa Monica, 73-unit building. The decision here was to use multiple Rheem 50-gallon heat pump hot water heaters in series. So you see the one in the picture. If you just look to the left, you see the other one, and then there's another one and another one. And so instead of the Sandon units where sort of the tanks are separated from the condenser, this just has the condensing unit sort of on top of the tank, like a big hat. This is in the garage. And again, it's okay to put it in the garage because there's no combustion. So, you can't have sources of combustion in the garage per LEED standards, at least. But in this case, again, it's combustion free. So you can mount it in the, in the garage space or some other sort of utility space in the building and not have that concern. Still have the concern that Kim mentioned about makeup air. And then finally, this project Legacy Square in Santa Ana, in Orange County, 93 units, National Community Renaissance. Their decision was to put the Rheem 50-gallon water heaters in a closet for each unit. So every unit of these 93 units has its own water heater. And then the closet opens onto the corridor. The corridor is not conditioned. And if you look over to the left, you can see the louvers on that door. So it's able to pull makeup air from the closet, but also through those louvers and, taking from the corridor, which works out here because we're able to have unconditioned corridors.
Have you heard any concerns? Because there was a question here about sound issues with some of these heat pump water heaters. Perhaps putting it out in the corridor then maybe resolves that.
Yes, so this comes up quite a bit, that they're noisy or creaky, or and the fan goes on, which can also be loud. So yeah, I think this is one reason why there's been an interest in putting them on the roof. Again, where like the fans are for the heat pumps that are doing HVAC, and then it may have been a consideration, Brett, for putting these off of the corridor. So remember, this isn't in the unit; it's sort of poking into the unit, but it's not accessible from the unit. It may have been about sound. I think it was largely about maintenance and access and the makeup air condition, but noise comes up quite a bit. I think Kim has mentioned this at a personal level, that wanting to upgrade but being concerned about the noise issues.
Yeah,
sure.
It's a big issue, and I think there's a call by some of the tech people for the manufacturers to start listing the zone rating for the systems, because they know, but they just don't advertise. So some of the models that different manufacturers make are much quieter than others, but there's no way to know until you install it. Right? So there's some push toward disclosure of sound ratings to see if that will help the manufacturers make them all clear.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and then we don't have examples of retrofit, which I wish we had, but I couldn't drum one up. So these are all new construction where it's it is easier. You're planning ahead. All of these issues still need to be considered, but you can fold it into the design process. On the retrofit, you could find situations where there's an existing tank water heater, but it's in a closet that's too small. So there would need to be some retrofitting of the apartment to provide the makeup air, or to have ducted makeup air brought into it. Finding places to put the tanks for storage. I could keep going, but as well, maybe not all, but many of us have learned that, the retrofit of existing buildings is always complicated. Every building is unique, and, there's can often be you touch one thing and it, resonates through the rest of the building, and in other things that need to be updated or improved. Certainly with electrification, you can start to see you add, electric appliances. You don't have enough circuits. You need to upgrade the panel. You need to upgrade the service. The utility starts talking about the transformer. A lot of things can get triggered, and I think all we're trying to do is to at least make people aware of those things. So it may be difficult, but at least it's anticipated.
And I'll just say we need to move on because we're short on time and we have two more topics we'd like to get to. But this issue of where is the air that the heat pumps are extracting the heat from coming from is an important issue. In California, heating isn't such a big deal, and they don't condition corridors. But in a corridor building in Boston, that corridor is conditioned because we, are required to provide heat from September 15 to June 15. And so the heat pump is just stealing the heat from the conditioned air in the corridor to transfer it to the water. And increasingly, the energy codes are recognizing that this is a problem. And I know I've seen that in the California code, in the next cycle, they're not going to allow heat pump water heaters to be in conditioned space unless they have direct supply and exhaust of the air, so that they aren't cooling down the air, they aren't pulling the heat from the air. So whether it's retrofit or new construction, that's a very real issue you have to think through when you're putting in the water heater heat pumps. Okay, let's move on. Let's quickly do another poll. Like, how much are you tracking where the money's at? What have you been able to find? What do you know? Vote quick. It's just, have you figured out where the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, the IIJA money is at? How about the Inflation Reduction Act? There's direct grant money. There is the tax credits. State and localities have programs, your local utilities. What are you aware of? What have you been using?
Just know if you're saying the Inflation Reduction Act funds and you're going on record saying that, we're gonna reach out to you because we can't figure it out. So just be aware of that.
We'll talk about that a little bit because you can know the money's out there, but no one knows where it is.
It's a mystery pot.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, it looks like we've got 50% of the vote, so let's go ahead and share the results.
Yeah, good. Okay, this is a tuned in crowd. This is people who know that there's money out there and have been finding it, except the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. That's interesting. Okay, so thank you. That's good. This is an aware crowd. So let's talk those through a little bit. So at the federal level, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, that put a lot of money into the weatherization programs and really expanded the funding available both for weatherization, for pre-weatherization work that homes often need, and for workforce training. So for those of you who have are contractors doing weatherization type work, there's funding coming to help train the workforce or to find trained workers when you need to build out your crews. And the EPA also got a boatload of money that they have turned into some major grant programs. And the status of that is that they have issued their RFPs and they intend to give the money to financial intermediaries. And that money will then be put out on the street. And the idea is to leverage public and private investment through those funds. So you can be looking, a lot of these things are gonna finally be available to us in 2024. And those EPA programs are in that category. The IRA program's the same. The big ones for those of us who work in housing are the HOMES program, which is funding for energy-focused retrofits of improving homes by 25% and 50%. Big bucks available if you're paying prevailing wages and using the apprentice programs that come out of the unions, but also rebates even if you aren't able to do the prevailing wages and the apprenticeship programs. That's a building by building system. The home high efficiency electric homes program is meant to provide the money to upgrade that electric panel, to give you the rebates that help to offset the installation of the heat pump and to install that induction stove and to pay for the extra wiring as you bring electrified equipment to places in your home that never needed them before. Those two programs, the homes and the high efficiency electric home rebates, are going to be run through state energy offices. And the RFP for the program descriptions just came out, and those are due back to DOE this month. And so once they get blessed by DOE, the funding allocations were announced quite a while ago. Then your state will be able to develop and implement the programs. So again, 2024 is when that money is finally going to make it onto the street. So you should certainly tune into your state level policymaking and your energy offices. I have heard that in Florida, the governor has refused to allow Florida to accept the money and to administer the programs for these two programs. So if there are those of you from Florida, you may want to talk to your state legislators about that and why Florida is turning away hundreds of millions of dollars to help people retrofit their homes. At the state level, of course, all this federal money is going to flow through the states. In Massachusetts, most of our state money is through it's really ratepayer money offered through our Mass Save incentive programs, and that's for both new construction and for existing home upgrades. Walker, anything to add about California?
Not really. I think it'd be better to just move along. I mean, I can just say quickly, like, we're waiting with bated breath to see what comes out through the state energy office. And then, some of the local utility programs have shifted towards decarbonization, paying for things like panel upgrades and service upgrades, not just the end use, appliance or system. But I think a lot of it is really how IRA is going to flow through the state programs, where there's a lot of anticipation.
Yeah. Well, we want to make sure we have a little bit of time to talk about this, the equity and what this means, and how we can be making sure that this focus on decarbonization and electrification is taking equity concerns in mind. So these are just some of the topics that have come up in the various conversations that Walker and I are part of, about concerns that people have about the impacts on lower and moderate income and communities of color as we make these transitions. So we just wanted to see if these are topics of conversation where you're living and working, and then we'll kind of walk through what these issues are and how people are addressing them.
And I just wanted to say, while we're taking that poll, we have reached our time for the formal CEU session. So for those of you who have been with us the whole time, you are dismissed if you need to go. You are approved for your continuing education units, but we are going to hang around and keep talking. We have a lot more conversation to go. So we would encourage you to stay, but if you have to go, you are approved. So we're going to go ahead and close this poll out, and then keep moving forward a little bit more, and then get into the official Q&A. So thank you. Should be sharing now.
Okay, great. Let's just leave this up and talk through these kind of things. So this higher cost for family utility bills, that can appear in a few different ways. Massachusetts is a utility market where electricity per unit of energy costs more than gas. So even if you put in a highly efficient electric system, families can end up with a somewhat higher utility bill when they convert from gas to electricity. And I will say it's made it a little bit of a harder conversation with my affordable housing clients too, because you can't automatically say doing this is going to save you money, which has always been the justification for energy efficiency moves in buildings. And then another issue is who's paying for things, because historically, in Boston, owners paid for heat and hot water, and families didn't really have air conditioning. But with these heat pump systems, they're providing air conditioning, and so suddenly, if you have to consider utility allowances and how you're setting your utility costs and your rents, it can affect the calculation there. And then heat pumps are going on the tenant's utility bill. And so now tenants who are used to a market where they don't have to pay for heat are suddenly having to pay for heat. And even if it's balanced out in the total rent and the deduction for the utility allowances, those of you, if you're not in the affordable housing world and you don't know what that means, I apologize. We can explain it later if you want to know. For those of you who are, you know what a challenge that whole equation can be. So peaker plants, peaker plants is the nickname for the power plants that add energy at peak times. And they are usually the dirtiest plants, because the coal plants are the ones that can be ramped up the fastest and also ramped back down. And so people are very worried about, as we put more electrical load on the grid that were going to be triggering the need for those peaker plants more often. And geographically, they have historically been located in disadvantaged and environmental justice communities. And so there's a big concern if we switch and the grid is still dirty and these peaker plants are being used, that we're increasing the ambient air pollution and affecting the health in a negative way of the people living near these plants. Walker, you can take another one or two and talk through the last couple.
Sure. So, I mean, there is this concern about grid capacity, and I honestly don't have a great answer. When you are in panel discussions and other sessions with utility reps, they always say that they're planning ahead and they understand what the upgrades need to be. In California, they talk about how there may be a shift of the peak towards earlier in the day if we're moving away from gas furnaces and people want heating in the morning, but then the conclusion is that they plan for a big afternoon peak, so they should be able to handle an earlier peak. I think this is just something to be aware of and a concern to continue to express. I think it is out there, and we have certainly seen power outages and that have put people at risk, and probably touches on the bigger need to just fold in these issues of resilience and equity, and being conscious of potential inequities in these implementation of electrification, and make sure that those issues are in the room. But and then finally, I'm not sure the sort of available funding to offset the cost of electrification. This does get back to the money that we anticipate coming out through IRA, and to reduce the cost through incentives or financing, which is what the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund seems to be focusing on, or tax credits for people who are paying enough in taxes to benefit from that. And then we do see different, varying numbers across the spectrum for what it can cost, to electrify an existing building or to build a new building all electric. I think the bigger concern on equity, at least, is just the concern that by switching to electricity from gas, that the utility costs will go up, or as we see some of the comments in the chat, that people become exposed to time of use rates, that can be very difficult to manage on an individual level, but as a person, can be devastating if all of a sudden you get a significantly higher utility bill. So I think our approach, Kim and I, is always, to be aware of all of these big issues and to be very pragmatic with the people that we're working with, and encourage them to use tested, proven technology and to understand the full spectrum of implications. So we're not sort of imposing cutting edge technology, that may have, maintenance issues or lack of familiarity with installation, but also understanding what these implications could be to the residents. On the project I showed, where there are individual water heaters, the one in Santa Ana, all of those are wired back to the house panel. So the owner, National Community Renaissance, is committed to paying the bills, the electric bills, for all of those water heaters, just like they used to pay for the gas bill when they had a central boiler system. And then they're able to do adjustments to the utility allowance, which they feel are sufficient, acceptable, to offset their costs and really their risks of exposure to those electric bills. So there's an instance of the owner being conscious of the potential negative impacts, and then structuring things, literally with how the building is wired, so that the residents aren't exposed to those electricity costs related to hot water.
Brett, is there anything else in the chat around this equity or concerns or questions that people have that we should surface before we wrap up? And I thank you, all of you, for sticking around with us. We really appreciate having you here.
I don't know if you can answer this quickly or if it's short, but I think it's, and especially for you, Walker, I think this is where this is really happening, is this sort of idea of an income qualified electrification rate. So ACEEE just did a great report on it that we're hoping to have them on the show later to talk about these rates across the country that could be a way to help with the transition, where people, again, who are struggling financially might have a rate for electrification that allows the transition to take place without undue burden. Have you heard anything about that?
I have not. Yeah. I mean, I wonder how it would be different than sort of the, a low income.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's more targeted. Like there's low income rates, which are helpful. And then there's one for electrification, right? So, yeah.
No, but this is interesting. We're in a moment of transition. There's, a lot of questions and not, so many examples to point to. So, this could, I don't know, I see this as a way to shield low income people from the uncertainty about the impacts of electrification. And yeah.
Great. Well, wrapping up, how are you going to tackle this, and what can you do to be successful? And this is what Walker and I help teams do, and especially as people are thinking more about the portfolio level thinking about this. A few weeks ago, the folks from SAFE talked about the tool that they've developed to help people start tracking information and thinking about building a portfolio roadmap. And the benchmarking requirements are forcing a lot of people to start doing that with their portfolios, new exercise. And then there are the formal programs around the Better Building Challenge and the Better Climate Challenge that are providing tools and roadmaps, competitions, comparison with peers. And so that's, an important way to get started, to come up with a basic strategy and set some goals for yourself that you can use to guide the process that you go forward.
Are we tag teaming these?
Sure.
I was reading the chat. There's so many interesting things to talk about. I wish we had another hour and so much expertise and knowledge. All right, you talked about developing a strategy. Yep. Okay, and then build the right team. Not there aren't so many people who are familiar with certainly with the hot water systems. I think there's plenty of familiarity around the the HVAC and installing mini splits and this type of an approach. But the hot water is still relatively new to quite a few people. So finding either a mechanical engineer if you have a big project, or plumber who's knowledgeable is key.
And then Walker and I are big fans of an integrated design process to really get everybody who needs to be weighing in, talking about a project from the early days. We talked about a lot of issues and considerations that need to come up early. Things like the batteries, where we looked into batteries for a building, but it requires a 3-hour firewall. And in our code requirements in Boston, it requires a 3-hour fire rating, and it has to be located in a place where there's a blast wall because batteries tend to blow up, right? So all of those kind of questions really need to be surfaced early and kept in mind and planned for early on. So we're big fans of that integrated design process and bringing all those issues in and making sure they get factored into the design as it moves along.
Yeah. Then on these financial benefits or financial options, largely that we expect to come from the federal government, I think this will become clearer and clearer in the months ahead. By early 2024, I think we'll know what the programs are and be able to figure out how they apply. And then I think there's an open question about the economic benefits and who's receiving those benefits and who may also be at risk. Plenty of great discussion in the chat about shifting to individual electric systems and therefore placing an increased burden on the residents. And that's certainly not what we want in the case of low-income housing. Certainly there's some intricacies to the way utility allowances work that we're not going to get into, but those are based on historic building stock. So they're not going to have very many reference points for an all-electric building or a building that has decarbonized, to then figure out what an adjusted utility allowance schedule should look like. I think with that, we're done. I'm happy to hang out if people have questions. I think Kim has some time too. But this is how you can find us. Kim's at Urban Habitat Initiatives, and I'm at Ramey Associates. Kim's in Boston, I'm in LA. And a lot of this thinking, and particularly about integrated design and sort of linking green into the financing and utility allowances is in the book. You can see, you can get it on Island Press, you can get it on Amazon. It's out there, and hopefully it can be a resource for people. And again, thanks for your time.
It's for sale at the bookstore at the National Building Museum, actually. So,
Yeah, cool.
DC residents, swing by the National Building Museum.
Great. Well, Kim and Walker, yeah, there are some more questions. So why don't we stick around and answer some more if you're okay with hanging out for a little bit?
Happy to.
And before we get to those questions, a quick reminder, the answer is usually yes. You can rewatch this session, share it with a friend or colleague, post it on social media, share it on LinkedIn. We see that once in a while. Feel free. Just put it out there. And that will be available in the next couple days. You can click subscribe on our YouTube channel and you'll get it sent right to your inbox when it's available. For those of you watching this in the future, not right now, but on demand, go ahead and take your quiz with an 80% passing rate and you will receive your ConEd certificate. For those of you here today, as long as you've been here for the entire CU certified hour, you can check your spam at certs@gutenbergcerts.com and you should receive your certificate in your inbox in the next couple of days. And as always, we need to say a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reyna, as well as all of our top tier sponsors, especially Rheem and Mitsubishi, who are going to help you decarbonize and take your projects all electric. They are here to help you meet the challenge, along with other sponsors who are going to help you meet green certification and sustainability goals. A big thanks to them. So, Kim, Walker, obviously the industry has shifted towards air source heat pumps because of cost, because of ease, because of all sorts of reasons. But a reminder, the Inflation Reduction Act has brought, this is an easy one. This is one that is not hidden. This is ready to go. Like, we joke about it, but this one's ready to go. 30% tax credit, non-refundable for ground source heat pumps. Some call that geothermal, but let's talk about it. Ground source heat pump systems, 40% for nonprofits with a direct pay bonus from the White House. Like, they're going to pay nonprofits. I don't know how it works. Ask your tax advisor. But so with that being said, is ground source heat pumps back in play? Do you see that happening on larger scale projects, or are we really transitioning all to air source now?
Let me start because it's quick. So in my climate zones, California, no, these get talked about and they never happen. I don't think it gets.
That's they get talked about. Yeah.
So, it doesn't, certainly in Southern California, most of the state, it doesn't get either cold enough or hot enough to justify the investment in the ground source heat pump. But, so that's been my experience for the past 20 years.
I actually have a client who installed one. It seems to work just fine, but it's hard and it's challenging because I have heard, and I'm not an engineer, but I have heard that actually water to air is the most efficient and uses the least energy for any heat pump technology. And, in the many buildings in Boston, commercial ones, some affordable ones, were built with a chiller and a cooler delivering 60-degree water. Just heat the water a little bit and cool the water down a little bit, and had heat pumps in the unit and had a circulation loop in the building. And, that's a very efficient way to heat and cool units. But now we have to take the gas out, or who knows about the chillers. So I would love to see more people do it. I'm on a lot of tight urban sites, so it's hard to have the land that you need. The water quality isn't great, and so you need to have a heat exchanger. and then have a separate loop for the building compared to the ground loop. So all of this is doable, but the design work at the front end and the additional costs, and then the building operators having no idea how this system works,
Yeah.
all work
Yeah.
against widespread adoption. So
Yeah, Kim mentioned this issue of
but,
yeah. I just say Kim brought up the building operators, and our book has a bunch of case studies in it, I think 10 or so, and that issue emerged in almost every single one of them. Is we've tried some more sophisticated systems, and we just don't have the people with the expertise to operate them, or the concern that there aren't people local who can fix them. So again, this at least in the affordable housing projects, I'm always leery of like pushing hard on the innovative technology. I can remember my last gas boiler project, in another sort of very assertive energy consultant had cajoled these developers into saying, you have to do all electric. It's an abomination to do natural gas in 2018. And I told them, I'm like, look, the gas is right there at your building. You're burning it at 96% efficiency. We're offsetting 70% of the energy needs with solar thermal, and the grid is only 20% renewables. So no, do the gas. And I also felt like it's like a tested approach. Even the condensing boiler was a little bit of a stretch, because there's examples of people not knowing how to maintain the condensing boiler. So this is sort of the reluctance to push too hard for I think a building type that can't fail. And I think this is important. Some people can try stuff and it can fail. Some people, a nonprofit building their new headquarters, it may be their job to try things that can fail and share the failures. But in the affordable housing sector, I feel like this stuff has to work. And then we went through a cycle. That project did get built with the boiler. And the next one up was the one that I showed with the Colmac central boiler system, that we decided the equipment was ready for prime time, and we could with confidence, make the decision to go with that system. This all predates the codes. This is 2019, 2020 kind of conversation. So anyway, long story short, it needs to be maintained. You need to have operators, you need to have qualified installers. That's foundational.
Yeah, those are great concerns to bring up. Yeah, it's not just what you can put in, even if it was free, right? But yeah, is there someone to maintain it? Is there an installer network? Is there a good maintenance plan? And that kind of gets into the other question. And this question is specific, I think, to the tenants, but could also be for the building operator. Those of us who work with the green programs, LEED, Enterprise, our own Green Star certification program, all require operation and maintenance manuals, require the training of the tenants so they understand how and why this stuff operates. I think the biggest example that we see all the time is those who use like the bath fan ventilation, right? It's a terrible strategy, but it gets you by legally and it gets you through the green program still. And so the residents go, why is my fan running all the time? Where was it in the where was that in the green plan to educate them on that? So now expanding that now to heat pump water heaters and air source heat pump operations and all of that. What are you seeing out there for the, education plans for these types of things for both the building operator and the tenants?
Terrible. I just have a project coming online where, let's just say it's a work in progress, right? It's toward the end of year one of occupancy and starting. And, the contractor gave them a thumb drive that is just the assembly of all the maintenance manuals for all the different individual components of the building, right? So where did that thumb drive get plugged in? Is it on the central server for the management company? Is it on some local computer? No one has any idea. Our commissioning agent puts together an excellent operations manual with schedules for preventive maintenance. that never gets passed on. Rent up for this building went very slowly. The management company was very preoccupied. It's still not clear they've got a resident manual and that they did any green education with the tenants. I point out to the client that this is a prerequisite for LEED and they have to do it in order to get certified. The building's scoring close to platinum, right? But it's like, well, if you can't get the manual done and make sure the tenants get oriented, you can't get certified at all, right? So, Walker, I hope you've had better experiences, but I find that the tools might be there, but the commitment on the part of the people who actually have to make the training happen and actually upload the manual and follow what it says and build it into the standard work order process doesn't happen the way all of us would like it to.
Yeah, I can add that our strategy is, with LEED at least, is to have all of the green things sort of integrated into the normal stuff that people use. So, in design, that's the design development documents, and then it gets into the specs, and it's in the submittals that come from the contractor. These are all things that people do anyway, and just trying to bury the LEED stuff in there. So on this question, we usually try and have it, the manual, whatever that's supposed to be. There aren't so many things that the tenant needs to know about, but it just goes in the lease, and so it's part of the lease up that they say. And then so there's a few things you need to know, that this fan is supposed to be on all the time, and so how your thermostat works, and if it's an induction cooktop, how it's supposed to operate. And then it's, at least it's delivered with a document that is of relevance to them, rather than a freestanding manual. The operations part is always tricky. Kind of the bridge from the HERS rater commissioning agent, reports, to the whoever is doing building maintenance. And then of course there's always this challenge of changing cast of characters. The person you work with, in design isn't there anymore. The project manager leaves, different people are on site. But I think at least the principle is to put that information in something that people are likely to pick up and use, rather than a freestanding document.
Right. So the new HUD green retrofit program that's out, do you see, so the question kind of is there electrification? Have you all looked into that, embedded into that program for some of the funding requirements?
Kim has looked at it.
Yeah, so I've looked into that. They've just announced their first round of grant recipients, and so it's definitely pushing people toward electrification. I don't know if it's a mandatory requirement for the funding, but it's definitely a priority for the planning and the funding to decarbonize and to
Great. Well, I know there's still a lot of great conversation and comments, so we'll definitely be sending that your way, and we can follow up kind of offline. And there's a lot more to go over, and there's always electrification conversation that will need to be had. So maybe we can have you all back on in the future for a part 2 session to keep the talk going.
I love that.
Yeah, that would be great.
But other than that, before we wrap up, where, again, just remind people can go to reach out, learn more, learn about the book.
Yep, you can reach me at Urban Habitat Initiatives, and Walker at Ramey Associates. And if you go to the Island Press website and use that code webinar, they'll give you 30% off your copy of the book. And that's enough to offset the shipping cost. So
there you go. All right. Kim, Walker, it's been great to see you and hang out and talk about this important topic again. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Have a great rest of your week. Take care and be well.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.